All right, family covenant for the modern age, the father. The most needed role in the world today is the role of the father. When people don't have a father, their very existence is futile. If you travel around the world and observe people's suffering, you'll notice a common denominator. They didn't have a father in their life. They got picked off by the wolves of the world and picked apart by the vultures in society because they didn't have the protection of their father. Evil preys mercilessly on the weak and defenseless. Gangs recruit kids from fatherless homes. Pedophiles groom kids who need a father figure. Scammers take advantage of a child's innocent trust. Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were experts at preying on defenseless children, and they did their dirty work in poor neighborhoods where the girls had no clue what their rights were under the law. None of their victims would have been harmed if they had been under the protection of a loving father. But it's not only the victims who didn't have a father. When you look deeper, you find that the perpetrators too didn't have a father to train them and discipline them and lead them along the right path in life. Any social worker will be able to tell you that children with a home pose much less risk to themselves and to society. It's like if a spider is in its web, it's probably not planning to go anywhere. But if a spider is on the wall, it will probably attack you in the night. Children who have a home are less likely to harm anyone. Without a home, the cycle of suffering and fatherlessness continues endlessly with no reprieve. Where are the fathers? That's $1 million question. Even when the fathers haven't left the home, they're often distant with no real presence in the family. Why is this? A possible reason could be that the wife thought it was her job to be the center of the home, and so he got pushed out. Another reason could be that he fell prey to society's lie of career advancement. Since men are dominion-oriented, they often try to advance as far as possible in their career in order to derive as much worth as possible. This is a mistake because their worth doesn't come from career, but from God, and God wants them to not only fulfill their role as a gardener, but also to raise future gardeners to ensure the growth of the garden. This means that a father will not only have to subdue the garden, but also subdue his own children. And this is precisely the problem we see in our society today. Fathers do a great job in their career, but they fail with their children. It doesn't need to be this way. A father could set up his life to do a great job in both simultaneously, but he will need to shift the focus of his dominion from the garden itself to the family within the garden. If he takes care of the garden himself, the garden will die when he dies. But if he takes care of the garden through his children, the future of the garden will be safeguarded. The only way a father can do this is to bring together his career and his children. Sadly, most careers in our world today are not gardening. Most careers take a father away from his children, which prevents him from doing both simultaneously. But fathers need to recognize this lie in society and not yield to it. Notice that Adam didn't commute to work every day. He didn't kiss his wife goodbye every morning, get into his Toyota Camry, drive 30 minutes to his office, spend 10 hours serving his boss, then drive home for a late supper before tucking his kids into bed. Adam lived in the garden. So if Eve had borne him children in the garden, there would have been no distance between the family and the career. In fact, there would have been complete oneness between God, family, home, and career. Fathers should try to recreate the Eden model by choosing a career that allows them to simultaneously take dominion over their family and their work. Only a few careers would actually allow for this. Sure, many careers have a take your child to work day, but 1 day per year isn't enough to train them to do anything. Training children takes years and years of hard work. A father will not have much time to do other things in his life if he wants to train his children properly to take over the garden. But his reward will be having children who are competent gardeners who bring him joy, honor, and protection. Which career would allow a father to live at his job and raise his children there? In Western society, farming, or other forms of entrepreneurship are probably the only careers that would allow for this. But a father should ask himself whether he even needs a career to begin with. After all, what is the purpose of a career? Isn't it to make money to buy food for his family? If food and water and clothing are the purpose of a career, then why not just get those things directly and cut out the middleman? Why not grow your own food and dig your own well, just like Jacob did? How much land would a person need to have to raise some goats and plant a garden? Only a few acres, most likely. In Canada, you can buy land for about $50,000 per acre near a town and about $1,000 per acre out in the boonies. This option would give a father the ability to unite both aspects of his dominion, garden and family, and it would give him the ability to be his children's teacher and protect them from becoming both victims and perpetrators of evil. Jobs are a new invention. Throughout the history of the world, nobody had jobs. If a man had a job, it showed that he didn't have a father. A job is simply begging a stranger for food in exchange for your time and strength. That's why money is called dough. You're asking him for dough while you build his empire. When the prodigal son left his father, he had to get a job. When he came home, he didn't need a job. Building your father's estate is a blessing because you're taking care of each other while you take care of God's good green earth. Work is a good thing. Jobs are a curse. People naturally love to work. Kids want to help their dad chop wood and help their mom bake pies. They don't want to be shipped off to a residential school and be forced to chop wood and bake pies while getting raped by a priest. The thing that determines whether work is a blessing or a curse is whether or not you're doing it for your father. The reason most fathers can't spend lots of time with their children is because they need to work for money. If they had servants to help them, they would have ample time to train their children. They would treat their servants well and save them from poverty. Then those servants would be able to carve out a life for themselves and become landowners in the future. But how does a person find themselves in a state of servitude to begin with? The story of the prodigal son gives us the answer. It's because they were cut off from their father. The blessing of work comes from being with your father. The curse of toil comes from being cut off from your father. The father is the most important person in the family because he is the head. If we get cut off from our head, we flop around like a chicken with its head cut off. For this reason, the head must be protected at all times. Our connection to the head is what gives us life and identity. Therefore, the role of the family is to protect the father and protect his name at all costs. Society always blames missing fathers on the fathers themselves, but the truth is that the family is often to blame. If a wife doesn't fulfill her role and her husband takes off, then the father takes off too. Each person plays several different roles, so when a person is lost, more than one role is lost. This is why it's so important for each family member to live out their role properly. Don't think of the word head as a metaphor for leader. Think about it rather as a head. What would it feel like to be a head? Well, the first thing you'd notice is that you're at the top of the body. You're supported by the body. You would recognize your need for the body. Imagine what it would feel like to be a head without a body. Would you even be a head? Not really, because you would just be rolling around on the ground. You would have gone from the highest position to the lowest position. If a father leaves the family, the body becomes headless and he rolls around on the ground. If the family leaves the father, the head goes down and the family flops around. Protecting this symbiotic relationship is crucial for everyone's well-being. As the head, the father must ensure that all the systems in the body are functioning properly. If the body is not functioning properly, he must make the decisions necessary to ensure that it starts functioning properly now. A father cannot get proud and think his high position is self-sustaining. Likewise, the family cannot get proud and think they could survive even a second without their father. Both are inextricably linked. This is why they need a covenant. A covenant protects that link by giving everyone a place within one body. If the link is cultivated, it will result in a strong family where the members depend on each other for life. If the link is not cultivated, it will result in the individual members drifting apart and trying to become their own little body. Thus, the original body will ultimately die because the members don't need each other anymore. Sure, some of the members might survive, but others will die for sure. It's the father's job to make sure nobody dies. When a family is cut off from their father, they experience shame. No wonder Adam and Eve experienced shame when they were cut off from their father. Jacob and Joseph were both cut off from their fathers too and experienced shame. David too was cut off from his father and experienced shame. So what would we expect to find when we get to the story of Jesus? Shame. But shame is a concept that our Western world has completely lost. Wives leave their husbands and feel no shame. Children grow up without a father and feel no shame. Our culture has completely normalized the shame of breakups and broken homes. But normalizing brokenness never fixes anything. It just entrenches the problem even more. Giving fatherless children a Pride Month won't do anything to solve the problem of their shame. Just because a person decides not to feel shame about something doesn't actually fix their eternal condition. In Daniel's final vision, he is told, "Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt." So we can see that shame is not something we can just decide away. We can defer it till the resurrection if we want, but dealing with it here and now would be a much better option. A father needs to ensure that his family does not experience the shame of being cut off from him due to his work. What is work? Work is the sacrifice of the present for the future. If a father's work is not for his children, then he is sacrificing them for some other future that isn't them. But this should never happen since children are a father's future. He should put them at the top of his priorities because his name will continue through them. There is no way his name will go on without them. But does he even care about the continuation of his name? The problem in Western society today is that the whole concept of generational continuity doesn't make any sense because there is no story playing out. Even for most Christians, the whole point of life is to make it to heaven. So what's the point of continuing anything by having children? If it weren't for a woman's constant nagging, most men wouldn't even have children today. And if it weren't for men's intense biological need for sex, they wouldn't meet women at the point of their intense biological need for pregnancy. Most children today are born out of a man's deep desire for sexual intimacy, which results in him becoming both a husband and a father. The time gap between husbandhood and fatherhood could be a matter of minutes. A man becomes a husband when he enters his bride through sexual intercourse. Assuming he ejaculates less than 2 minutes later, he could become a father in less than 5 minutes of becoming a husband. In other words, the act of becoming a husband is the same act as the one of becoming a father. This has profound ramifications for a family because it means that their roles are all formed simultaneously and thus must be exercised simultaneously for the family to exist. Nobody can stop exercising their role at any moment in time, otherwise the family doesn't exist. And not only time, the family was also created in the same place, which is why families need to be together. When families are physically separated, the very existence of the family is thrown into question. But when the family spends time together in the same place, it brings the family back to the very beginning when the covenant was born. This is why polygamy complicates covenant so badly, because it separates the place out of which the siblings are born. The seed is the same, but the soil is different. A pure family covenant involves the same seed, the same soil, and the same blood. A father's responsibility, therefore, is to plant his seed into the same soil to protect the family covenant from becoming convoluted. Seed can only be planted through pleasure. A father must always take pleasure in his children because they were born out of his pleasure. Think about it. Every single child in the world is the fruit of their father's pleasure. In fact, a husband could never become a father but through pleasure. Pleasure is the only way to fatherhood. For this reason, fathers need to make their children feel like they are the fruit of his pleasure, not just the byproduct of his pleasure. Children are fruit, not products. Fruit is good, byproducts are bad. A fruit gets its identity from the tree. A father, then, is the identity giver of his children. If the children are near their father, they will have a secure identity. But if the children are cut off from their father, they will spend their whole lives in search of their identity. But why would they get cut off? An apple doesn't fall far from the tree, unless, of course, the tree gets uprooted and planted somewhere else. A father must ensure that he doesn't get uprooted and planted somewhere else. Many careers in our modern age require a father to relocate geographically. In this case, a father must simply say no and find a different career. Companies don't care about people's families. They don't consult people on how the move will impact their family. You would never hear a boss say, "If you take this position, it will make us a lot of money, but I don't think you should do it for the sake of your family." The reality of life is this: people will squeeze you for everything you have if you let them. Because of this, fathers need to draw a clear line in their mind that they will never cross. A fruit also gets its sustenance directly from the tree until it gets detached from the tree and becomes its own tree in the shadow of the parent tree. The parent tree then provides shade from the sun and support through its root network until the day it dies. After this cycle repeats for several generations, a forest is born, or an orchard in this case. But how do you think the fruit is supposed to be severed from the tree? Is it supposed to become super ripe and let go of the tree by itself? Is the tree supposed to let go of the fruit? Is the wind supposed to blow the fruit off? In each of these cases, the fruit falls somewhere near the tree. But imagine if a passerby picks the fruit and tosses the seeds somewhere down the road. Would that be a bad thing for the fruit to end up so far from the parent tree? In the Bible, it was common for people to find themselves far away from their father. Joseph, for example, got taken far away from his father against his will. Jacob himself had been sent away from home by his mother. Moses and Samuel too found themselves separated from their father against their will. By the time we get to the life of Jesus, we pretty much know how the story will go. But why is this happening? Is this separation a good thing? Or is it a curse that needs to run its course as a result of Adam's sin? In Psalm 105, we find out that it was God who sent Joseph ahead of his family. And Joseph himself understood this because he said, "What you intended against me for evil, God intended for good." So the separation was brought about by evil, but God intended it for good as a way to ultimately save the whole family and bring them back together. Evil intentions separated them, God's intentions united them. The separation was never a good thing, but it was necessary for the curse to run its course. As we approach the end of the Old Testament, we get the feeling that God himself will be the ultimate victim of the curse. Near the end of the book of Zechariah, God gave this prophecy: "And I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication. They will look on me, the one they have pierced, and they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and grieve bitterly for him as one grieves for a firstborn son." Why would God get pierced by his own children? The answer is because it was the only way to remove the separation. He ended the curse by taking the curse upon himself. Loving fathers have been doing this throughout history. They absorb the rebellion of their children even though it kills them. Mercy triumphs over justice, and mercy can only flow through the pierced heart of the Father. Fathers, then, should seek to remove the separation even though it will pierce them. This requires being present. Distance cannot be removed from a distance. It necessitates a drawing near. God didn't remove the distance by staying up in heaven and sending an angel to do the work, nor did he send a prophet or a priest to be his agent. He himself removed the distance by hanging naked on a cross with his children surrounding him. He came physically and emotionally and spiritually and established a covenant with his family which would never pass away. Notice that he wasn't aloof in his presence. He was always intentional in everything he did. Many children today describe their father as being there but not there. This is often worse than not being there at all. At least if he's not there, you can fantasize about what it would be like if he was there. But if he is there, then you're reminded every day that he's not really there. This is unfortunate because it's not a proper reflection of the heart of God. In order to fix this problem, a father must spend a lengthy period of time with his family physically, emotionally, and spiritually to solidify the covenant. After the covenant is solidified and the family is united and strong, he can do whatever he wants. He can leave for an extended period of time, knowing that his family is in good shape. He can go live in another country for a while because his sons will manage his estate. He will be free as a bird because he set up a functional family and erected a strong fence around it. His distance will not be perceived as distance because the family is united in spirit. He must, however, promise to return because that's what God did. The promise of togetherness forever is what gives the whole family hope and joy. God set boundaries to keep his family together, so a father must do the same. It's not acceptable for any family members just to wander off. If that happens, they'll find themselves in a famine just like the prodigal son. But there's a difference between rebelling and wandering off. Rebelling happens when a person knows what the boundaries are. Wandering off happens when there are no boundaries to begin with. The prodigal son didn't wander off. He rebelled. He knew that he needed to stay with his father and build his father's kingdom. But he made a conscious decision to leave. And he didn't just leave with nothing. He left with a huge part of his father's estate. Thus, he took away not only his father's future strength by removing himself from his role, but also his father's past strength by taking away his hard-earned land. The loss would have been mind-blowingly catastrophic. Western society, though, wouldn't understand this loss because in today's culture, children are expected to leave and march straight into the desert. The only difference is that kids don't walk off with half their parents' estate. So parents are okay with losing their future strength, but not their hard-earned estate. Why is this? It's because they don't view their children as their strength. They expect their children to go off and build their own estate while they themselves save for retirement. Sure, having a bit of help from their kids would be nice every now and then, but it's not expected. And because it's not expected, the parents have to be very careful that they don't overinvest in their kids and sacrifice their own retirement independence. No wonder so many people today are lost in a desert. The parents have required their children to do something that the prodigal's father never asked of him, to go and build his own estate. An estate connects you to your past and your future. So children who are cut off from their parents' estate have no past and no future. This is why so many young men today just wander the world and live for any little bit of pleasure they can get in life. The idea of building an estate from scratch is too daunting for them. So they just try to disconnect from time itself through drugs, sex, and alcohol. In a way, they are disconnected from time because the estate is the thing that ties together past, present, and future. Without an estate, they're just drifting through a meaningless existence. No wonder we have independence overkill and a famine of families in our society today. If children are cut off from their parents' estate, they will not be able to get married and continue to build the family. Christians always moan about the moral decay in society, but they don't understand that the root cause is under their very nose. The cause is that children are cut off from their fathers. When they find themselves in this position, they really have nothing to lose in life because they already lost the most valuable thing of all. To deal with the pain of that loss, they will develop all kinds of destructive behaviors. Any bit of pleasure they can get will at least take their mind off the pain of homelessness. Why work hard when you have nothing to work for? Children were made to work for their fathers. They were never meant to be cut off from their fathers. What are they supposed to do? Wander around in the desert for a while in hopes of finding a fulfilling life? The truth is, if a father cuts off his children like this, he's forcing them into the desert of alcohol, drugs, sex, and possibly even suicide. At least with the prodigal, he knew that his father had not forced him into that life, which is why he came back. But for children who are forced into that life, there's no way back because they don't have a place on their father's estate. All fathers, therefore, should structure their lives to be like the prodigal's father by giving their children the honored position of sonship and daughtership on their estate. And just like the prodigal's father, they must draw a clear distinction between their sons and their servants. The father recognized his son while he was still a far way off and ordered the servant to get the family ring to reinstate his son's position immediately. The prodigal tried to become a servant, but his father wouldn't let him. His father knew very clearly who his sons were and who his servants were. Notice that the position of sonship was restored on the father's estate. The father didn't meet him at Starbucks or send him the ring in the mail. What good would a ring have been in the desert? The only place the ring had significance was on the father's land. Yes, the son had remained his father's son while in absence, but he had lost the position of sonship because he had severed himself from his father's estate. That's why the father said he was dead and is alive again. The only way to be alive is with your father on his estate. The astonishing thing about the story, though, is that the older son had been living on his father's estate the entire time while believing he was a servant. He said, "Look, all these years I've been slaving away for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never even gave me a young goat to celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, the one who has devoured your estate with prostitutes, you have killed the fattened calf for him." Just like the sons in the story, we often learn our lesson the hard way. It takes a famine to find your father. The older son never found his father, even though he was living right under his nose. Neither son recognized that they had the best life possible, living in the home of their father. Moses understood this when he wrote Psalm 90. "Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations." Sometimes people say, home is where you hang your hat, but it would be more accurate to say, home is where you have your father. As the owner of the house, the father must be honored above all others. Notice that the prodigal's father wasn't working when he returned. His older son and servants were working. This is how a father should be honored. When his sons grow up, they take over his work and he simply relaxes and enjoys the fruit of his labor. He gives them strength early on and they give him strength later on. This is why the prodigal son committed such a grievous sin. Not only did he not work to give his father strength, but he took the share of strength his father had given him and blew it on prostitutes. He made his father's kingdom smaller and weaker. But his father let him do this because he knew that his strength belonged to his sons, not to himself. This is the nature of true relationship, allowing your strength to belong to someone else. The father had entrusted his strength to his son, and his son repaid him with evil. It's so clear from the story that what the father wanted most was real relationship, and real relationships always risk betrayal. If a father does not take this risk, he will forfeit a real relationship with his children and also surrender himself to a life of endless work. But if he executes his role properly, there's no reason why he would need to work at all after his sons have reached their teenage years. At that point, he can do whatever he wants. But just like the prodigal's father, he will probably choose to stay at home because his sons are his strength and joy. They are his reason to celebrate, which is why the prodigal's father was ready and waiting to throw a party when his son returned. With his son lost, he had no reason to celebrate. Abraham lamented the fact that he didn't have a son to inherit his estate. It grieved him to the core. Today, fathers don't seem to care who benefits from their estate. They just hope they have enough money to buy themselves a spot in the old folks' home when they get old. Then, when they die, their wife inherits the estate, and when she dies, the children get a whole pile of cash simply because their name occupied a position on a dusty old document somewhere. It wasn't out of the yearning of their father that they inherited it. It's easy to tell where someone's values lie by looking at where they park their money. Jesus said, "Where your treasure is, that's where your heart is." If parents save all their money until death, it means that safety was their highest priority. The children won't inherit a pile of cash when they're 70 years old and think, "Wow, my father cared a lot about me." Rather, they'll interpret it as their father clinging to his money as long as he could before death pried it out of his hands. The reason they'll interpret it this way is because in most cases, the money is just sitting there for decades. How many 90-year-olds have you seen trading stocks or managing real estate? Not many. What would they have to gain from their investments? Would they want to leave behind a larger nest egg for their 70-year-old children? What's a child going to do with a pile of cash when they're 70 years old? Are they just going to perpetuate the cycle and leave a massive nest egg to their 70-year-old children? What if their children die before them? It happens all the time. Someone has to put an end to the madness. It makes no sense for people to inherit their parents' money in their retirement after having been separated their entire adult lives. In the Bible, families lived on the same land, and inheritance was a natural transfer of control from father to children over time. The children received a living benefit from their father's estate the entire time before he died. In our culture, children are forced to go build their own estates alone and not receive any living benefit from their father's estate. This is why the mortgage business is thriving. Banks have literally become children's masters. Proverbs 22 says, "The borrower is servant to the lender." Who is the lender? The bank. The bank understands the child's problem and offers a solution. Since children are not welcome to live with their fathers after high school, they need to go and rent a house on their own. But this move feels devaluing to them because they went from a position of ownership under their father to a position of temporary occupancy under a stranger. They moved from dwelling to sojourning. So the bank saw a huge opportunity. They offered to give children back a sense of dwelling in exchange for 25 years of servitude. The children accepted this offer and signed away their 20s, 30s, and 40s to slavery. And since they were expected to spread their wings and fly, they often flew far away. As the years go by, the children's interaction with the parents becomes limited to phone calls and the occasional Christmas get-together. Blood is now the only thing connecting them. Every other link has been severed. So when the day comes that the parents need help in the old folks' home, the children reply, "Sorry, I'm busy serving my master." This hurts the parents because they think, "We took such good care of our children for the first 18 years of their life. Can't they at least give us a little bit of help in the last 18 years of ours?" They're right. The children should repay them for the 18 years, but they can't because their master won't let them leave work. Even when their parents die, companies normally only allow 1 or 2 days of bereavement leave. How much less when their parents are still alive? Of course, children could just quit their job, but that would be putting their own children at risk. They wish they could help their parents, but it would only be possible if their parents themselves were their master. The parents decided not to be their master, which put the children in an awkward position. So when the parents need help, the children will just avoid them until they die. This happens every day across Canada, and the sad truth is that all this misery could have been avoided if the parents had just set up their lives differently. When people are in a situation where they're obligated to do something but can't actually do it, they avoid the other person. Children don't want to be in a position where they know they need to repay their parents but can't because the way their parents set up their lives left them poor and weak. So they simply make excuses to not visit their parents because they're in a catch-22 position. At the end of the day, when your job is your only source of strength, You have to stay committed to that, even if it comes at the expense of family relationships. That's why nobody visits their parents in old folks' homes. It's just another obligation and burden to them. Sadly, many children in this situation are just waiting for their parents to die so that they can be reunited to the estate they lost 50 years ago. Avoiding your parents might not seem like a nice thing to do, but niceness was never designed to hold a family together. Money was. God intended for the estate to hold a family together, not niceness. Niceness is nice, but it can't replace the estate. That's what's wrong with our modern culture. We've reduced family covenant to niceness. But niceness doesn't pay the mortgage. Our master pays the mortgage. Imagine how much money could be kept within the family if children didn't have to pay back the bank. A 25-year mortgage at 6% interest doubles the total cost of the house. So if there are 4 children in the family and each child buys a $300,000 house, that means over $1 million are leaving the family. If the children could have paid their father instead, he would have literally become a millionaire just on interest payments. But that's not how fathers today think. They think their kids need to learn how to work. They think it's the bank's job to teach them financial literacy, just like it was Sunday school's job to teach them biblical literacy. Basically, the children are sent away from their father into the desert to learn the necessities of life, and when they finally learn those necessities, they rarely come back. There's a pandemic of lonely old white people in our society, and yet we can't see how our model of hyper-individualism is causing the problem. We have sympathy for the symptoms, but we're blind to the underlying problem. If parents set up their lives to be alone, they need to realize that their estate is going nowhere and serves no purpose. They should restructure their estate so that the children will receive maximal benefit from it while everyone is still alive. Children need to live on the father's estate so that he can teach them about life. It's a father's job to teach his children, but not just about random things. He needs to teach them the testimony of God and the testimony of the family. Psalm 78 gives us God's instructions for fathers. For he established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers that they were to teach them to their children, so that the generation to come would know, the children yet to be born, that they would arise and tell them to their children, so that they would put their confidence in God and not forget the works of God, but comply with his commandments. A testimony is the story of what God has done so far and what he wants to do in the future. God had established a testimony in the family of Israel, which meant that a story was unfolding and each person had a part to play. Fathers were commanded to teach this story to their children so that they would know where they fit within the story. Without this story, the people would just be random wanderers on the earth, just like every other group of people. Israel was special in that they had the God of the universe dwelling with them and leading them to fulfill a global mandate. So if the fathers failed to pass on this testimony to their children, the future generations would become just like their idol-worshipping neighbors, which happened over and over again. Every time the people got lost, it was because they forgot their testimony. Their identity was wrapped up in their testimony. So when they lost their testimony, they lost their identity. Then God would raise up someone like Ezra to remind them of their testimony, and the people would reclaim their identity. If fathers had just done their job in the first place, Israel's identity would never have been lost because their testimony would have passed on. In the same way, fathers today need to give their children an identity by giving them a part to play in the unfolding story of God. This is the most important thing a father can teach his children. The problem with just teaching kids the normal Christian message is that they won't really understand how their family fits into the story. They'll just get the idea that they're supposed to believe the right thing so that they can make it into heaven. But that's not what Christianity is about. It's about a story playing out here. If people don't know how to fit into that story, they'll get lost by trying to write their own story. A father needs to keep all his children within the same story so that they don't get lost in their own stories. If everyone is living a different story, why would they stay together? It follows then that a father needs to structure his estate in a way that keeps the family within the same story. The promised land played a key role in God's family's testimony, especially their collective journey to it. Each family member had the same experiences along the way, and when they finally got to the promised land, they had the responsibility to contribute to God's estate and also the right to benefit from it. The same rights and responsibilities should be found in families' estates today, a medley of contributing and benefiting. It's a father's job to ensure that everyone knows what their rights and responsibilities are within the estate. Because if they don't know, they'll just start doing random things to avoid the awkwardness of ambiguity. Clarity is the key to the estate. It allows the estate to function like a living organism. When there's a lack of clarity, you end up feeling exhausted even if you didn't do anything at all. It's like your first day on the job when you don't really know what to do, so you just stand there awkwardly. You'd rather lift heavy weight than face the heavier weight of awkwardness. If no one teaches you what you're supposed to do, you'll probably just quit. It's the same in a family. If family members don't really know what to do, they'll probably want to escape the situation altogether. This is the father's fault for not teaching his family how to function within the estate. If the estate is functioning properly, each member will flourish, and if each member is functioning properly, the estate will flourish. A flourishing estate outlives the father because he passes the baton on to his heirs to carry the story forward. When he gets old and frail, he passes control of the estate to his sons, not his wife, because his wife isn't the one who is going to carry the story forward. This is the single biggest flaw in Western society. Instead of sons receiving control of the estate, wives get control of it, and the story stops in its tracks for years, if not decades. What on earth is an old lady going to do with a pile of land or a pile of money? Can she manage it better than her sons? Was she trained for the job better than her sons? It would be pure arrogance on the part of the wife to think that the estate belongs to her. It doesn't. It belongs to her children. Her children are the ones who will take care of her in her old age. So why would she want to withhold strength from the very people who want to take care of her? It doesn't make any sense. Yet that's what our society has decided is the right thing to do. And now we are rightly reaping the reward of ruptured relationships. Wealthy old women are dying alone in old folks' homes because their children have been cut off from their father's estate for decades. It's the father's job to ensure this never happens. As he draws near to death, he needs to lift up his head and look into the future with eyes of faith, just like the men in the Bible did. Joseph looked ahead with faith and gave instructions to his family before he died. Moses, too, gathered the whole family of Israel and told them what they needed to do. Joshua rehashed the entire testimony of Israel and gave the family instructions before he died. King David didn't, which would have thrown his whole family into disarray if Bathsheba and Nathan hadn't stepped in. How many wives today step in to ensure that their sons get power instead of them? When fathers pass on their estate to their children, it's a blessing to them, and this blessing is a manifestation of their faith in God's continuing testimony. This is why it's fitting for a father to give instructions to his children before death in order to bind them to the testimony. Isaac and Jacob both spoke words of blessing to their sons before death, but most fathers didn't. At least it's not recorded. Abraham, for example, left everything he owned to his son Isaac because God had told him that it was through Isaac that the testimony would continue. Whether the blessing is spoken or not, the father's estate will act as the blessing because it transfers the father's strength, his name, and his testimony to his sons to carry forward. Everyone in the family must work to uphold the father's name and his instructions. Psalm 138 says, "You have exalted above all things your name and your word." This is how our Father in heaven is honored, and also how our Father on earth must be honored, even after death. By carrying out the Father's instructions for his estate, The sons are furthering his name and his word and building his testimony. This carries eternal weight, which will come to fruition in the kingdom of God, but only if the father has made God his father. The father is the spiritual leader of the family. If he doesn't make God his father, everything else is meaningless. It means that his name, his word, his estate, and his testimony will not come to fruition in the kingdom of God, but rather in the kingdom of death. God is the God of the living, not the dead. So a father needs to decide whether he wants to build his estate on life or death. That is the most crucial decision that will ever be made in a family. The head is the decision center of the body. When it gives a command, the body needs to follow without missing a beat. The body, on the other hand, is the mood center of the head. If the body is functioning properly, the head will be in a good mood. But if the liver is malfunctioning or if the intestines are suffering, the head will be in a bad mood. It's the responsibility of the head to make decisions that allow for the body to function properly. This requires an acute level of awareness. For example, if the body is vomiting, the head must quickly realize that a bad decision was made and a change of course is necessary. The change in course must include a time of healing before it returns to its pre-puke diet. The body cannot be expected to handle bad decisions with no recovery. If the head does not recognize the bad decision, the body will keep breaking down until it is completely dead. But this will not come without blaring alerts from the body. The head must pay attention to these warnings before it's too late. The body, on the other hand, must try to accommodate any bad decisions to the best of its ability. For example, suppose the head decides to eat a whole pizza instead of stopping at 2 slices. The body should adapt to the best of its ability while acknowledging that this is not a regular occurrence. It should be forgiving of the head. Or suppose the head decides to skip a few meals. In this case, the body should enter a mode of rest and not badger the head for food every 5 minutes. The body should trust that the head knows best. In like manner, the head should keep its ear closely tuned to the ongoing needs of the body. Proverbs 12 says, "The righteous know the needs of their animals." How much more then should a father know the needs of his own children? Being aloof is a surefire way to kill the family. A father must work hard to be emotionally and physically accessible to his children so that he actually knows what they need and when they need it. This will also help the children know what he needs and when he needs it. After all, the children exist to help their father. So when he is suffering in some way, the children need to respond immediately. It's a father's responsibility to train his family to be the kind of people he needs and wants so that he never has to leave them. Most fathers today are in a position where they themselves were never taught anything that we've discussed in this chapter. They find themselves cut off from their father's estate, and they don't have a clue how to connect their family to the story of God. In this case, a father should explain to his children that the family is starting from scratch and needs to figure things out as they go along. Kids will understand this. They will want to help their father build an estate of his own and read the Bible together so that they can find the right path in life. This will be an exciting journey for the whole family as they bind together under the name of God. Since God is our Father, fathers everywhere have a perfect example to follow. They just need to read the Bible and try to copy God.